Hello and welcome. Part of our work at the University of Washington's Herring Center for Inclusive Education is to spotlight individual inclusionary practices at work in our schools throughout the state. However, we are also often asked about the broader implications of inclusive education and what the research says about student outcomes. This video provides a brief overview on the published research related to inclusive education. But before we go into what the research says, it's important to define the term. For the purposes of this video, we are drawing from the 2015 article by Filler and O. Young that defines inclusive education as, quote, the belief that all students have a right to meaningfully participate in the general education setting, both academically and socially. Inclusion is realized when all students, regardless of their designation to receive special education services, are provided with targeted services, supports, and accommodations, allowing them to learn in the general education classroom, interact with peers, and engage the core curriculum. Why is this topic so important? Well, it's critical to remember that inclusive education is first and foremost a civil right, guided by 3 federal laws that work together to ensure equitable access and opportunity to high-quality education for students with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is a federal law for children birth to 21 that ensures students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. The Every Student Succeeds Act is the primary federal law governing K-12 education that promotes inclusive education by requiring states to establish challenging academic standards for all students. The law emphasizes accountability for the performance of students, ensuring that schools are held responsible for the progress of students with disabilities and other historically marginalized groups. Finally, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, is crucial for creating an inclusive education system by prohibiting discrimination based on disability. It ensures that students with disabilities have equal access to educational programs and services in their schools and districts. In addition to these federal laws, extensive research has found that inclusion benefits everyone. An overwhelming majority of studies show either neutral or mostly positive outcomes for students with disabilities, students without disabilities, educators, parents, and the greater community. Let's start with what the research says about inclusive education and students with disabilities. Research shows that students with disabilities who receive instruction in general education classrooms show positive outcomes in literacy, math, science, social skills, and communication. A 2020 study by Kathleen Gee and colleagues found that students on IEPs included in the general education classrooms for 80% or more of their day demonstrated higher levels of progress across numeracy, literacy, and communication goals when compared with equally matched students in segregated classrooms. Carter and colleagues found that when using an intervention of peer-mediated instruction, students with complex support needs increased both social and academic participation, showed more progress on social goals, increased interactions with peers, and led to a greater number of new friendships, many of which were maintained upon conclusion of the intervention. Finally, a 2018 study by Theobald and colleagues found that students with learning disabilities who spent more time in general education classrooms in high school had higher rates of on-time graduation, college attendance, and employment than observably similar peers with learning disabilities who spent less time in general education classrooms in these grades. So what we've seen across these studies and more is that inclusive practices benefit a range of student grade levels, a range of student ability levels, and a range of content areas. Research shows similar outcomes for students without disabilities. In their paper, A Summary of the Evidence on Inclusive Education, Dr. Thomas Hare and his colleagues cite several studies that show both neutral or positive academic outcomes for students without disabilities, especially those in the younger grades. In the 26 studies reviewed by Colomboka and colleagues, the authors found that the vast majority, 81%, of studies indicated that non-disabled students either experienced no effects or experienced positive effects on their academic development as a result of being educated alongside students with disabilities. Additionally, students without disabilities have socially benefited from being in inclusive classrooms with students with disabilities. Some of the themes include awareness, understanding, tolerance, and acceptance of disability, with all students learning to think more critically about what it means to belong in a space. In addition, decreases in bullying and discrimination have also been reported. Inclusive education can be a philosophical shift for some, which means that inclusive leadership is considered vital in promoting a culture of acceptance and collaboration within schools. Inclusive leaders must work to actively engage all members of the school community and place ongoing value on diversity, honest conversation, and professional development. To implement district-wide changes, a systemic and coordinated approach is required. A systematic and coordinated approach is required. Research suggests that successful district-level change involves collaboration among various stakeholders, such as administrators, teachers, parents, and community members. A 2007 study by Reindak and colleagues followed a district through a 5-year process of dismantling segregated classrooms and establishing inclusive settings for all children. The journey emphasized the efforts across the district, school, and individual teams, as well as parents, administrators, and educator groups, which was needed to make the necessary changes in placement for the students with disabilities. Building capacity is also critical as personnel shift. Finally, inclusion helps with the family-school partnership, as well as reduces parent stress. Expulsion or suspension rates decrease when students with disabilities are included in general education settings, meaning that the disruptions to parent work or other commitments decreases, as then does the stress of potentially needing to pick up a child early or care for them at home. Inclusive education promotes active involvement of families in the educational process. Research suggests that when families are engaged, students tend to experience better academic and social outcomes. Collaborative partnerships between educators and families are crucial for developing individualized education plans, IEPs, and addressing the unique needs of all students. In summary, over 30 years of research shows that intentional and meaningful inclusive education not only benefits students with disabilities, but it also creates supportive and accessible learning environments where all students feel valued and are able to learn and grow. Want more information? Many of the studies highlighted in this video, as well as others, can be found in one of these comprehensive articles shown on your screen. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about inclusive education research. For tip sheets on inclusive education practices, including our tip sheet on inclusive education research, please visit ippdemosites.org.